Welcome to Uncopyable Women in Business. I'm your host, Kay Miller, also known as Muffler Mama. Now, I don't know if you're an entrepreneur, business owner, sales professional, or part of an organization, but I do know that you want to be more successful, earn more money, and make a bigger impact. Stay tuned as I, along with my guests, give you marketing, sales, and personal branding strategies that will give you an uncopyable advantage. Today, I am here with Hady Mendez. And Hady is a New York-based Amazon bestselling author, Latina speaker, and ERG coach. Hady has over 25 years of corporate experience. Her company, Boldly Speaking, is focused on transforming the professional experiences of women and people of color. Hady, welcome to the podcast.
Hola, thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
It's been really fun getting to know you a little bit and chatting before we started recording. And you have some very interesting perspectives, not only as a woman, but of course, a woman of color in the corporate world and now the speaking and training world. So I would like to have you talk a little bit about your background, and also for listeners who might not be familiar with what ERG is, to explain that. Yeah, let's go.
Also, I'll start with explaining what an ERG is. So an ERG, it stands for Employee Resource Group. Some companies have what they call BRGs, which are business resource groups. Some have affinity groups, employee networks. They're all the same thing. And they're pretty much, I like calling them clubs. That's like the easiest way to describe them. They're a club for employees, and usually people who identify in a similar way join this club. So as an example, I'm a Latina. I usually join the Latinx employee resource group or employee network. I meet other Latinx people. Usually that is a safe space for me. It's a place where I can ask questions and learn and just be in community with people like myself. Usually those are very psychologically safe spaces for employees, where they can just show up authentically, and then maybe ask, especially when you're new, you're just not sure about something, am I allowed to take lunch for an hour, or am I supposed to be in the office all 5 days? What's the deal here? Tell me the unspoken rules, so to speak. And I think those ERGs are great spaces for that. And for other things too. If you experience microaggressions, or if you're having a hard time with your manager and you just need some advice or coaching, those are the kind of spaces where you could really tap into the community and maybe the experience of the people that are like you, that share an identity with you. So that's the whole employee resource group thing. And I've been part of employee resource groups for 20 years. And I've done everything from being a member to being a global lead to being head of the intersectionality. I was the intersectionality chair for women's ERG, which was great because it was I was the person who was constantly saying, hey, we need to make sure that we're getting good representation, that we're bringing in different identities, that our speakers represent all of our stakeholders and things like that. So that was really fun. I've been an executive sponsor and I've been an advisor. My last corporate role was head of equality for a major tech company. And I was actually the advisor to the 7 employee resource groups that we had at the time. But my career has been over 25 years. I spend most of it at the intersection of technology and financial services. So very corporate roles in financial services and tech companies that are household names. I did consulting when I got out of school. So I went through that, which is a pretty common experience. And then I spent 5 years in nonprofit. 2 of those years I spent overseas. So I lived and worked in Cochabamba, Bolivia, in South America. And I worked with incarcerated and formerly incarcerated women when I was down there. So really cool and transformative experience. If you want to talk about that at all, it was really fun and really interesting. And then I spent 3 years as a community school director at an elementary school in the South Bronx here in New York City. And then I've been an entrepreneur for the last 18 months, a solopreneur. And that's been really filled and super hard, all wrapped up into one. Anybody who wants to talk about entrepreneurship, I think that's a different podcast, but a very good conversation to have, because you really learn a lot about yourself and your ability to be resilient and get knocked down and keep showing up and pivoting. And I thought this was the thing, but it's not the thing. So now I have to try something different. And it's just, oh gosh, you learn so much about yourself. And it's fun if you have money in the bank because you really are learning so much, but like it does get a little scary some months. So anyway, I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, that's a great start. And yes, entrepreneurship. Of course, I've been a business owner along with my husband for a long time, over 30 years. And so often people say, I wish I could have my own business. It is so exciting. And it is also very scary.
Yes.
You do everything on your own. And I used to joke when we had regular telephones, I'd say, okay, if you want marketing, press 1. If you want sales, press 1. Janitorial, press 1. It's like the two of us were doing a lot. And so now you've got, this company, Boldly Speaking, where you're helping others. And I do want to mention, I meant to mention this at the beginning. Stay tuned because at the end of the podcast, Hady's going to give us some pro tips, some actual, I'd say, mindset shifts that will really help you move forward, be more successful, and really be true to yourself. And one of the things that you talked about that we could discuss is personal branding. And that's very timely since we just released our book on personal branding. So you have a chapter in the new book, Awareness Put Me On. It's an Amazon bestseller. How new is it, by the way?
It was released in April, so in the spring. So about 6
Very
months.
new. Okay, that's great. Okay, so we'll give a link to how to order that when we're done. But one of the things that you talk about, of course, is setting yourself apart and also dealing with your perception, how people perceive and treat you as a woman. You had a phrase in your book about, and you said it in Spanish, and it was about you're seen as more pretty if you're more quiet. So tell me about some experiences that you were told to pipe down, basically, right?
Yeah. So the phrase, it's a Spanish phrase, and it's in Spanish. Anybody who speaks Spanish is going to be familiar with it. And it's calladita te ves más bonita. And it does literally translate to you're prettier when you're quiet. And that's a conditioning that it's a cultural norm and a conditioning that we get at a very early age. It's something that you probably would hear at home. It's something that probably an older person would tell you and say, calladita te ves más bonita. Come on. And this was even before I got into the corporate spaces. But it's important because I brought that mindset with me into the corporate space. So when I wanted to say something or I wanted to disagree or I wanted to say something, maybe like challenge someone, I was like, I remember when I was home and I was a little girl and somebody said, calladita te ves más bonita. So maybe I'm not going to say the thing that I want to say. Maybe I'm going to think about it, or I'm going to think about it a lot, or I'm going to think twice, or I'm just not going to say it. It depends. I guess the long and short of it is that it really was a very limiting belief. And there were lots of other limiting beliefs. That wasn't the only one. Things like work hard and keep your head down it's like the cousin of you look prettier when you're quiet. But it's the same thing. And the reason they're not good, and there's some other limiting beliefs. The reason they're not good is because it really takes away your power. It strips you of your power. And then you're like, you're giving it away instead of saying, you know what? I disagree. I don't know how it's going to be received, but I'm going to share my point of view with good intentions, and I'm going to offer it. And maybe it'll spark a conversation. Maybe it'll change the direction we move in. But this is all, I think as I think about it holistically, that's why DEI is important. And that's why belonging and inclusion is important. Because if you don't invite people, if you don't make places safe, if you're not encouraging people to share, you're not going to get people's best work. You're not going to get the best ideas. And I'm like, I'm the case in point for that, because that was a lot of my experience early on until I started to shift my narrative and shift how I started to approach and think about these things.
Yeah, and it sounds like you changed your personal brand. But you know, what you talked about being quiet, being seen as more attractive, pretty, whatever, to be quiet. That's a very common theme I'm getting from women. One of the women I interviewed, Rhonda White, I will put the link to her episode in the notes because I can't remember which one, but she has risen from answering a want ad in the newspaper to CEO. And she said that when she was early in her career, someone who was mentoring her, a male, they were going into a meeting and he said, I think you should probably not talk in this meeting. That would be best. And she didn't listen, obviously, because she's now CEO. But I think some of that is put on us by others and some we put on ourselves. Would you agree with that?
Yes, but I think we put it on ourselves because we're exposed to it over and over again. So it's like that messaging, either directly or indirectly, we get the message. There's another saying in Spanish that's pretty good. It's en boca cerrada no entran moscas. And it's, if you don't open your mouth, bugs won't go in it, which means it's the same thing. It's going to be unpleasant. You could experience something unpleasant if you speak out. So you probably are better off not speaking out. And it's like these things in my culture, for me as a Latina, I think I got a lot of these messages early on, and then I just brought them with me. But yeah, to your point, it is something we have control over. It is something that we could change. It is a mindset that we could shift. It is behavior that we could do differently. It doesn't mean that people are still not going to tell us things like, hey, nobody asked you, or hey, but make sure you don't say anything at the meeting, or things like that. Like it could still happen, but I feel like we have the ability to say, thanks, appreciate your like coaching or whatever, but I'm going to go ahead and do the thing that I think is the right thing to do.
And when I say we put it on ourselves, I think it is because it's been ingrained in us. Yeah. I remember being a good girl was a big thing when you were a kid. And I have a funny story about that. I don't think I've told it on the podcast, but I don't remember this, but my mom tells me that when I was being potty trained, and if I was successful going pee in the toilet, she would look and point in the toilet and say, good girl. And then one day I said, I have to go good girl. Thought she was telling me what that was called. So anyway, we are taught to be good girls, I think. And so that is really something that has been ingrained. So sometimes we put that on ourselves, but it comes from external feedback, etc. So how do you change the way that you behaved in situations with other people? And I think that goes back to the personal branding again, and we're going to talk about that mindset. But part of personal branding, of course, is creating a package that helps other people see who you are. And so you wanted to be seen as you are, which is an empowered Latina woman. So Latina is female, Latino is male, and Latinx encompasses everything. And as I'm trying to learn and keep up, I just wanted to point that out. So anyway, back to your personal brand. What's that?
Latinx is all inclusive.
Latinx is all inclusive. I'm learning. So how did you craft your brand, or what have you done to be seen as different?
Yeah, it was very important for me to have a personal brand. I learned before the terms like really took off that I wanted to be known a certain way. I felt like we talked about earlier about like giving away my power. I felt like people were telling me who I was. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, no, I own my narrative. I'm going to tell you who I am. And then I had to figure out, who am I? What do I stand for? And I stand for authenticity. I stand for community building. I stand for giving back to others. There were being genuine, being very relationship and like building trusted relationships and partnerships. I think about like all the customer facing work that I did. It was really important for me, for my customers to trust me, and that they knew that I was in it not for a transaction, not for a deal, but for a relationship and a partnership. And so I had to take a look and like really assess what were my values. And what I do is a little bit different, but a lot of what I identified as my values remain the same. The core thing is that now I'm the one telling the world. That's the most important shift that I made, was like, I'm telling you. And I remember this, I'll never forget this. I had a manager who called me disruptive, and it was not meant as a compliment. And it really shook me. I was just like, how could you how could you say that?
I know I'm not supposed to be disruptive.
Yeah, I just felt really bad about it. And I was like, can you give me an example? And they gave me an example. And that's when I realized, I'm like, you're basically saying that I advocated for myself and my teammates. That is my brand.
Sign me up for being disruptive.
Yeah. That's a good thing. I am someone who will always advocate for myself and for other people. And so I had to not only tell the story like of who I am and present myself, but make sure that people knew like I am disruptive, but it's a positive thing. And I'm a DEI expert. I'm a subject matter expert when it comes to employee resource groups. I'm a Latina speaker. I'm a community leader. When I use stories, authenticity, like I said, is a really important thing. So I like storytelling. And I'm pretty consistent with the messaging. And so I feel social media is a great way to be consistent with your messaging because it just gives you could really say the same thing in lots of different ways. You can use pictures, you can use examples, case studies, things like that. So it's a fun way to build a brand.
This podcast is sponsored by my latest book, which I co-authored with my husband, Steve. It's part of the Uncopyable series, and this one's called Uncopyable You. Create a personal brand that gets people to know you, like you, trust you, and remember you. Order it now on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, or your favorite independent bookstore.
And I started to do it, believe it or not, because I was in all these customer-facing roles for many years, and I wanted to pivot into DEI. And I said, I'm going to rebrand myself as a DEI expert. And I spent probably about 3 years doing that before I actually got the job, a paying job in DEI. But I had all this employee resource group experience. And then I started participating in panels. And then I was like doing volunteer work with organizations. And I'm like, all this adds up to tell a story. And that's the story I'm going to tell people. And that's the story I want people to know about.
So all that comes together is what makes you uncopyable. And you just read my book, Uncopyable You, that I co-authored with my husband. And what I like about what you're talking about is that you were so intentional about this. And I think people just get swept up in a brand that is put on them and never do what you've done, really dig down deep, as they say, and think about all the things that make you, I'm going to say, uncopyable. Because like you said, you have stories, you have viewpoints, you have experiences. And when you add that all up and talk about how you want to help people and who you are as a person, a Latina woman, that makes you uncopyable. Nobody can be exactly like you. So I think that I love how you've gone about this.
Yeah. And if you think about it, a Latina that spent 25 years in tech and financial services, I had my Series 7 and everything. So I was like really in it. And then I did nonprofit and I went overseas and I spent 5 years in nonprofit. And then I came back to tech. And so I have that story to tell. And then I had to pivot into DEI. And when you add all of that up, like there isn't anybody who's done that. But what I have found, so I am uncopyable. That's fact. Now to tell the story so that people can see all of that and be like, wow, this is a very unique person. We need to hear her story and her perspective. That's the challenge. That's not that easy sometimes to tell that whole story and say it succinctly.
Because if you have your own personal brand and nobody knows it, that's not going to help. So I think having that defined, and I find, for example, your branding promise, the best way to get that across is just to tell people. They're not going to do the work to figure out what Hady stands for and all these experiences. You need to tell them, and you are telling them. And that, again, sets you apart from everyone else. I want to talk. We are getting fairly close to the end. I want to make sure we talk about these pro tips that you have, because women do sometimes have to fight for ourselves. You talk a lot about mindset in the chapter of your book, and you say, okay, the myths are people will advocate for you. Hard work and keeping your head down is a recipe for success. I can succeed without the support of others. The list goes on, and you can read those in the chapter. But nobody's there going to come for you, right? You have to.
No one's coming to save us.
Yourself. Nobody's coming to save you. So I liked the fact that you really lined out, as I said, myths. The first one I thought, oh, okay, that's good. People will advocate for you without your specific request. And I'm like, no, that's not what happens. It's not what does happen, is what you need to fight. Some of the pro tips that you have are really digging down into who you are about, like we're talking about, and defining your brand. But then how do you get that across? How do you show people that you're not only unique, but you're better? So the first pro tip that I love, and it's something that you can do, listen, is to create a brag sheet. And why don't you tell us, Hady, what is a brag sheet?
Yes. I've heard a lot of people talk about this. I don't think I made it up or anything, but I like talking about it and I'm a big fan. And I've actually executed on this. I've done it and I've shared it with managers. And it's basically you're keeping a laundry list of all your accomplishments and achievements. And no achievement is too small. And what you want to do is you want to document what you did, when you did it, and the impact that it had. And this is good. And you just want to be really consistent about doing this. You could keep it on like a Google sheet that you share with your manager. You could keep it on your phone and then transport or to import it into the Google sheet, whatever's easiest for you. I used to keep it on my phone. And then like once a month, I would just make sure that the spreadsheet was current. And then that's how I did it. That was what was the easiest for me because I always had my phone with me, but I didn't always have the spreadsheet handy. And and I just kept track of everything. And it could be things that are work related, obviously. So projects that you get done, maybe a customer deal that you close or an achievement that you have around your quota. If you're like in sales, yeah, I did a lot of customer facing work. So I always had like goals that I was working towards. So you can definitely keep those. But I also track things that were maybe a little bit more something that my manager wouldn't have known about unless I put it on the brag sheet. So let's say I was working, I'll give you an example. I was a customer success manager at a tech company, and they had monthly member meetups for like developers that worked with this technology. I had like really no business being in this meeting. Like I was a customer success manager. I wasn't a tech person. I had nothing to do with it, but I saw it was a woman's tech meetup group. And I'm like, oh, that's interesting. And then I was like, you know what? Why not? Why can't I be part of that? Why can't I like just hang out with them? And I like talking about DEI. So I'm like, I'll talk about DEI. I'll talk about things from a customer perspective. I'll add value in any way that I can. But like, why not be part of it? And so I ended up being like one of the administrators for that meetup. And my manager had no idea. And I was coordinating with all the like customer, really senior people. Like they were just like my meetup buddies type thing. And so it ended up being a very interesting space that I played in just by accident. But there were lots of other things that I did outside of work. And I was like, I'm going to throw everything in here, let my manager decide what he or she thinks is interesting or compelling or helpful for my next promotion or like what's really interesting in terms of like exposure. But like, I'm going to put it all here. And I think it made a difference because we have things to talk about. When it was time to do like a performance evaluation, there was more than enough material there. I don't know if you've ever been talking to your audience now. I don't know if your audience has ever been in the situation where you're suddenly the managers, tell me what you accomplished this year. You're like, I don't know.
On the spot, can't think of it.
I don't remember. Yeah, it's hard to remember these things. So if you keep track of them on a consistent basis, then you just send them the link and be like, it's all here. And I think it makes a really big difference. It's very powerful.
Yeah, it is very powerful. And you're right. You did not invent maybe this concept, but one thing that I think makes how you frame this distinctive is you call it a brag sheet. And I have a confidence file. When great things happen, when customers say thank you, when I close a deal, whatever, I have a confidence file. But saying the word brag, which is probably seen as very bold, really, again, for women, means, yeah, I'm going to brag. I'm owning this. I'm sharing this. I'm proud of this. And yes, when you communicate that to your managers or whoever, it builds you up. It helps them see your personal brand. And you said part of that is what happens with customers, the feedback that you get. You called that receipts. Do you want to explain how you see the receipts as part of this whole mindset process?
Yeah, so receipts, it's what the kids say. You're probably like Gen Z, millennial people would be really familiar with this term. But the idea is that you have evidence, you have proof. Let's say you're having a conversation with your manager about getting a raise or getting a promotion or both. And they're like, I'm not really sure. I'm not sure if your contributions this year merit you getting a raise and then at that point you would be like, I have receipts. So let me pull out my brag sheet and let me show you the amount of things that I did. And obviously like all of it has to be correct and complete and true. And also I guess it depends, like, I don't know what you did relative to your peers. So I'm not saying you're always going to get the raise or the promotion. But the idea is that you have evidence of the things that you did and you can bring them up quickly. And they say, tell me 3 things you did. You're like, here's 10 things I did. How about that? Or I'm not sure that you did anything to impact our customers. It looks like everything was really internal facing. And then that's where who you impacted and what the impact was comes in handy, because you could be like, no, when I did that thing, when I joined that group, it actually increased my knowledge of the thing, or I ended up getting a special certification because I was part of that group. That did happen to me. Like I ended up getting certified because everyone was talking about things that I knew nothing about. I'm like, I think I need to get certified, like this initial certification level, just so I could keep up with the conversation. But things that you get involved with, then you can start showing the impact and the value that was created as a result of that thing. And so you have the receipts to show what you did, and then but an integral part of making sure that those receipts are powerful is keeping track of the value that was added, whether you're an ERG leader and you increased your like membership, or if you were a department lead and your like department had great customer feedback. In sales, we have the NPS scores, where my score is always like 10 or 9 or whatever the case might be. Then, so those are the receipts that you want to keep handy and just talk about it, because people will forget. We think that our manager says, oh yes, she's a salesperson and she had the top. They forget everything. So you have to remind them. It's just a reminder. It's all it is. You know, it's not even as bold as it sounds. All you do is people.
Yeah, I think what I love about that too, though, is you're ready for it. It's like in sales, when you think about, okay, what are all the objections that I could possibly get? I'm going to be ready for everyone. And like you said, sometimes when you're put on the spot and someone says, okay, what have you accomplished? If you don't have that, like really right there, super familiar, memorized, you might hesitate, and that takes away from the power of what you're saying. As we wrap this up, I would like to ask you, what do you wish you knew earlier in your career? And then we'll end with that.
Yeah, I would say that I wish that I was able to take more risks. So I took some risks, but I think I could have taken a lot more. And so I wish that I knew that was something that I could do. And if I failed, I would just be like, oh, like I'll try something different next time. So I do wish that I allowed myself to take more risks and to fail more and not be afraid of that, of what that would mean, and just know that it would be okay. And yeah, I think that's a big one. And I think the other thing that I would mention is just asking for help more. So I was one of those people that was like, I'm just going to work hard and I'll get promoted and people will notice me because I work hard. And I never asked for help. And I think about all the times people were like, hey, how's it going? And that would have been such an opportune moment for me to be like, things are great. And I'm so excited because I'm looking forward to taking on more challenges next year. And I want to lead the team and I want to do these things. And I didn't say any of those things. I was like, oh, things are okay. And then I never got that help because I never asked for it directly. And that's one of the things that I talk about that are like, it's not going to happen unless you ask for it. You really need to be specific, because people are very busy and not everyone knows that's what you're needing or you're looking for. So you need to be really transparent about stuff like that.
And like you said, you could tell someone, your management or somebody, once or twice or 3 times. They're busy. They have so many things on their plate and their mind, that a good reminder to just be out there with your strongest qualities, because that is, again, part of your brand. Hady, this has been a great conversation. I really loved talking with you. And I'd like to have you share with the listener, how can they get a hold of you or connect with you? And also your website, you could give yourself a plug because you're a speaker, etc.
Great. So you can find me on LinkedIn, and I'm one of the few Hady Mendezes that are out there. And I'm sure the spelling of my name will be somewhere.
So yeah, I'll put the links in.
That's the critical part. But yeah, I'm on LinkedIn and I'm pretty active there. My website is boldlyspeakingllc.com. And you can go there and you can actually find a couple things there. You can find like my services, which is pretty cool. You can find the link to the book, which is also nice and convenient. But you could also see, I host a LinkedIn live show every couple of weeks called Latinas Front and Center. And I actually have all of my past interviews on the website. So it's really fun. It's a nice way to learn about Latinas that are doing amazing things. And it's just something that I do for fun because I just want to like really spotlight the talent that we have in the Latina community. So that's a really fun thing. And then I have like my client list and other goodies on the website. So check it out.
Okay. So that link will be in the show notes, or I should say those links will be in the show notes. So Hady, thank you so much for spending time with us, for enlightening us with your perspectives and what you've learned over your career. I think that's going to be extremely helpful for the listeners and for me. So Hady, thank you so much for being on the show.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Uncopyable Women in Business. If you enjoyed the show, you know the drill. Please like, share, rate, and review it on your favorite platform. I also invite you to join my private Facebook group, Uncopyable Women in Business. See you next time, and always remember to be uncopyable.